Rain lashed against the windshield of the armored Bentley, blurring the neon lights of Chicago into streaks of blood red and cold blue. Inside, Salvatore Moretti adjusted his silk tie, his mind locked on the $1 million negotiation that had just collapsed. But then, the headlights swept across a desolate bus stop, illuminating a figure curled beneath a thin, soaking newspaper. A face he recognized, a face that belonged in the warmth of his penthouse, not shivering in the gutter. Stopping the car wasn't an act of mercy, it was curiosity. But what he found in her trembling hands, and the secret she was guarding with her life, would shatter his empire and bring a war to his doorstep that he never saw coming. The storm over Chicago wasn't just weather, it was a warning. The wind howled through the canyons of steel and glass, rattling the windows of the city's most exclusive establishments. But inside the back of the blacked-out Bentley, the silence was absolute. Salvatore Moretti stared out the window, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. At 34, he was the capo of the Moretti crime family, a man who moved millions of dollars in logistics and security with a single phone call. He was feared for his temper and respected for his code of silence. Tonight, however, he was just tired. "Enzo," Salvatore said, his voice a low rumble. "Take the side streets. The police presence on Michigan Avenue is too heavy tonight." "Yes, boss," Enzo replied, the leather gloves creaking as he turned the heavy steering wheel. The car turned down a narrower, grimier street. This was the edge of their territory, where the pristine skyscrapers gave way to boarded-up storefronts and flickering street lamps. Salvatore watched the misery pass by with a detached gaze. He had grown up in streets like these. He knew the smell of desperation. But then, something broke his detachment. As the car slowed to navigate a deep puddle, Salvatore's eyes locked onto a bus stop bench. It was empty, save for a pile of wet trash, or so he thought. As the headlights washed over the bench, the pile moved. A woman. She was curled into a tight ball, trying to shield herself from the freezing rain with nothing but a sodden newspaper and a thin, grey cardigan. It was a common sight in the city, but it was her hair that stopped his heart for a fraction of a second. Even wet and matted, it was a striking, unusual shade of auburn. He knew that hair. He had seen it swaying while a woman dusted the bookshelves in his private study. He had smelled the faint scent of vanilla and old paper whenever she left a room. "Stop the car," Salvatore commanded. Enzo hesitated. "Boss, this isn't a good spot to—" "I said stop the car, now." The Bentley lurched to a halt. Before Enzo could scramble out to open the door, Salvatore was already stepping into the deluge. His Italian leather shoes splashed into a puddle of oil and water. The freezing rain soaked his suit jacket instantly, but he didn't feel it. He marched towards the bench. The woman didn't move as he approached. She was shaking so violently that her teeth chattered audibly over the sound of the rain. "Isabel?" Salvatore asked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the storm. The figure jolted. She looked up, terror widening her eyes. Her face was pale, gaunt, and smeared with grime, but it was undeniably her. Isabel Bennett. The quiet, efficient maid who had been working at the Moretti estate for 6 months. She was known for being invisible, for keeping her head down. When she saw him, she didn't look relieved. She looked horrified. She scrambled backward, slipping on the wet metal of the bench, trying to put distance between them. "Mr. Moretti," she gasped, her voice a ragged whisper. "Please, I didn't steal anything. Please don't hurt me." Salvatore frowned, the water dripping from his dark hair onto his forehead. "Steal? What are you talking about? Why are you sleeping on a bench, Isabel?" She hugged a tattered backpack to her chest as if it contained gold bars. They said if I came back, you'd kill me. I've stayed away. I promise." Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "Who said that?" "Please, just leave me," she begged, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. I'll leave the city. I'm trying to get a bus ticket. I just need a little more time." Salvatore looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just homeless. She was terrified of him, and she looked sick. Her skin had a translucent, waxen quality, and there was a dark bruise blossoming along her jawline that she tried to hide by turning her face away. A rage, cold and sudden, ignited in his chest. Someone had touched what belonged to him. Even the help fell under the Moretti protection. "Get in the car," he ordered. "No," she whimpered. "Isabel." He stepped closer, towering over her. He softened his voice, a rare occurrence. "I'm not going to hurt you. But if you stay out here tonight, the pneumonia will kill you before morning. Get in the car." She hesitated, her gaze darting to the black vehicle where Enzo was waiting with his hand on his holster. She looked back at Salvatore, searching for the monster she had been warned about. Instead, she saw a hand extended toward her. With a trembling breath, she took it. Her hand was like ice. Salvatore pulled her up, but her legs gave way immediately. He caught her effortlessly, scooping her into his arms. She was alarmingly light, nothing but bone and wet fabric. As he carried her towards the Bentley, she went limp against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Boss?" Enzo opened the back door, eyeing the dirty, soaking woman with confusion. "Call Dr. Aris," Salvatore barked, sliding into the back seat with Isabel still in his arms. He didn't care that the water and mud were ruining the cream leather interior. "Tell him to meet us at the penthouse, immediately." "Is she injured?" Enzo asked, jumping into the driver's seat and gunning the engine. Salvatore looked down at the woman unconscious in his lap. The backpack had slipped from her grip. A manila folder was poking out of the top zipper. But it was her wrist that caught his attention. As his thumb brushed against her pulse point, he saw the markings. Not just bruises, they were burn marks. Cigar burns. Salvatore's jaw tightened until it ached. "She's not just injured, Enzo. She's been tortured." The penthouse elevator opened directly into the foyer, a sprawling space of marble and modern art that overlooked the city skyline. Usually this place was a sanctuary of silence. Tonight, it was a triage unit. Salvatore carried Isabel into the guest suite, laying her gently onto the Egyptian cotton sheets. He stripped off his soaked jacket and threw it on the floor, barking orders at the staff who had scrambled out of bed. "Get warm towels. Get the medical kit. Where the hell is Aris?" "He's 3 minutes out, sir," Enzo said, standing by the door, his face pale. He had seen the boss angry before, but this was different. This was a quiet, simmering focus that usually preceded a funeral. Salvatore looked down at Isabel. In the warm light of the room, she looked even worse. The bruise on her jaw was purple and yellow, days old. Her lips were cracked. He reached for the backpack she had refused to let go of, placing it on the nightstand. "Matilda!" Salvatore shouted. The head housekeeper, a stout woman in her 60s who had practically raised Salvatore, hurried in with a basin of warm water. She stopped dead when she saw the woman on the bed. "Oh my God," Matilda whispered, a hand flying to her mouth. "Isabel!" "You recognize her," Salvatore said, his voice dangerously calm. "Good, because you're going to explain to me why one of my employees was sleeping in a gutter and thinks I want to kill her." Matilda's hands shook as she set the basin down. She began to gently wipe the grime from Isabel's forehead. "Sir, we were told she was fired 3 weeks ago. Mr. Rocco handled it." "Rocco?" Salvatore's eyes flashed. Rocco was his underboss, his right hand. Rocco handled distribution and enforcement, not the domestic staff. "Why was Rocco firing a maid?" "He said..." Matilda hesitated, glancing at the unconscious girl. "He said he caught her stealing from your private safe. He said he found cash in her bag. He told us he escorted her out, and that if we ever spoke to her again, we'd be fired too." "Stealing," Salvatore repeated, testing the word. He looked at the frail woman on the bed. She was wearing shoes with holes in the soles. If she had stolen from his safe, she would have enough money to be halfway to Mexico, not starving on a bench 3 miles away. Did you see the proof? Salvatore asked. No, sir. Mr. Rocco is... Well, nobody questions Mr. Rocco, Matilda said quietly. The elevator chimed. Dr. Aris rushed in, carrying his medical bag. He was a short, balding man who had stitched up more bullet wounds for the Moretti family than he cared to count. He didn't ask questions. He just went to work. Salvatore stepped back, pacing the room while Aris checked Isabel's vitals. He went to the nightstand and picked up the tattered backpack. He needed answers. If Rocco had lied to him, there was a reason. And in Salvatore's world, lies were usually expensive covers for betrayal. He unzipped the bag. Inside, there were no stolen bundles of cash. There was a change of clothes, a half-eaten granola bar, and the manila folder he had seen earlier. He opened the folder. It wasn't financial records. It wasn't codes. It was photographs. Grainy, zoomed-in photographs taken from what looked like a cell phone. The first photo showed a shipping container at the docks, Moretti territory. But the men standing in front of it weren't Moretti soldiers. They were wearing jackets with a distinct insignia, a red scorpion, the cartel from the south, the enemy they were currently in a ceasefire with. The second photo showed the men shaking hands. One was a cartel lieutenant. The other man, smiling broad and smoking a cigar, was Rocco. Salvatore felt the air leave the room. Rocco wasn't just firing a maid. He was selling the family out. Isabel must have seen something she wasn't supposed to. Salvatore! Dr. Aris's voice broke his concentration. Salvatore looked up, snapping the folder shut. Will she live? She's malnourished and suffering from exposure. But with antibiotics and fluids, she'll recover, Aris said, removing his stethoscope. He looked grave. But the burn marks on her wrists, they are infected. And there's something else. What? She's pregnant, Salvatore, about 4 months along. The silence in the room was deafening. Salvatore looked at Isabel's flat stomach, hidden beneath the oversized sweater. 4 months. She had been working for him for 6. Is the baby okay? Salvatore asked, his voice low. Surprisingly, the heartbeat is strong. She shielded her abdomen. Even when she was likely being beaten, she protected the child. Dr. Aris packed his bag. She needs rest, and she needs safety. If she wakes up in a panic, she could lose the baby. Salvatore nodded. She's safe. Nobody touches her. Aris left, and Matilda finished cleaning Isabel up before retiring, leaving Salvatore alone in the dim light of the guest room. He pulled a chair up to the bed and sat down, the folder resting on his knee. He looked at Isabel's sleeping face. She was a witness. That's why Rocco had terrorized her. He must have threatened to kill her and the baby if she talked. He had thrown a pregnant woman onto the streets in winter to protect his treason. Salvatore reached out, brushing a stray lock of damp auburn hair from her forehead. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were green, unfocused and glassy. She gasped, trying to sit up, but Salvatore placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Easy. You're safe. The folder, she rasped, panic seizing her. He'll kill me. He knows I have it. Rocco? Salvatore asked. She froze. You know? I know he lied, Salvatore said. I know you didn't steal, and I know he hurt you. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. He was meeting them at the docks. I was just bringing him his coffee in the back office. I heard them. He said he was going to take over. He said you were getting soft. She gripped Salvatore's hand, her nails digging into his skin. He said he was going to arrange an accident for you next week. Salvatore's expression didn't change, but his eyes turned to ice. Did he? I took the photos with my phone and printed them at the library, she whispered. I wanted to show you, but he caught me before I could. He burned me. He said... Her voice broke. He said he'd cut the baby out of me if I ever came near you. Salvatore stood up. The transformation was instant. The concern for the woman vanished, replaced by the lethal aura of the boss. He buttoned his cuffs. Rest, Isabel. You and your child are under my personal protection now." "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice trembling. Salvatore walked to the door, checking the load of the pistol tucked into his waistband. "I'm going to have a chat with Rocco," he said, "and I'm going to remind him that I am many things, but soft is not one of them." As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered it. "Mr. Moretti," a distorted voice said, "I believe you picked up a piece of my trash tonight. The girl. Send her out, and we won't burn your building down." Salvatore smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. Rocco was watching the house. "Come and get her," Salvatore said, and hung up. The silence that followed the phone call was heavier than the storm raging outside. Salvatore stared at the darkened screen of his smartphone, the distorted voice of the threat echoing in his mind. Send her out. It was a bluff, of course. Rocco wouldn't just leave if he handed Isabel over. Rocco was here to clean house. He was here to erase the only witness to his treason. "Enzo," Salvatore said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with lethal intent. "Code black. We are compromised." Enzo, who had been standing by the window, immediately shut the heavy velvet drapes. "The security feed is looping, boss. They hacked the system. I'm looking at the same footage of the empty lobby from 10 minutes ago." "They're already inside," Salvatore realized. He moved with a terrifying efficiency. He didn't run. He stalked. He crossed the room to a decorative bust of Julius Caesar on the mantel, tilting the head back to reveal a biometric scanner. He pressed his thumb against it. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing a cache of high-grade weaponry. He grabbed a modified Sig Sauer and 2 spare magazines. He tossed a smaller Glock to Enzo. "Stay with the girl," Salvatore ordered. "Do not open this door unless it is my voice you hear. If they breach the room—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Enzo nodded, his face grim. He knew the protocol. Death before capture. Salvatore stepped out of the guest suite and into the long marble hallway of the penthouse. The lights flickered once, then died completely. The building's main power had been cut. Now the only illumination came from the lightning, flashing violently through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, dancing shadows across the expensive art collection. He moved silently, his socks sliding over the cold stone floor. He could hear them now, the faint crunch of boots on glass. They had breached through the terrace doors. Salvatore pressed his back against a pillar, controlling his breathing. He counted the footsteps. 3. No, 4. Heavy tactical gear. These weren't street thugs, these were hitmen. Rocco had brought in professionals. A flash of lightning illuminated the living room. 4 figures in black tactical gear and night vision goggles were fanning out, their suppressed rifles scanning the room. Salvatore didn't wait. He exhaled, stepping out from the cover of the pillar. Pop, pop, the first assailant dropped. 2 rounds in his chest before he even registered a target. The silence shattered. The remaining 3 spun around, their weapons spitting fire in the dark. Bullets chipped the marble pillar as Salvatore dove behind a heavy oak sofa. The room erupted into chaos. Vases exploded, paintings were shredded, and the deafening roar of gunfire drowned out the thunder. Salvatore moved. He never stayed in one spot. He rolled to the left, firing beneath the sofa, catching the second man in the leg. As the man screamed and fell, Salvatore rose and finished him. 2 left. "Suppressing fire!" one of the attackers shouted. They were communicating. Salvatore sprinted toward the kitchen island as bullets chewed up the floor at his heels. He slid across the polished granite, crashing into the other side, just as a grenade rolled into the living room. Flashbang! He squeezed his eyes shut and covered his ears a split second before the deafening bang rocked the floor. Even with the precautions, his ears rang, and white spots danced in his vision. He was disoriented. He heard the rush of footsteps. They were charging him. Salvatore blindly fired over the counter, forcing them to pause. He needed an advantage. He grabbed a bottle of high-proof whiskey from the counter, stuffed a linen napkin into the neck, and used the gas range's pilot light. still flickering despite the power outage, to light it. He hurled the Molotov cocktail over the island. It smashed against the chest of the third attacker. The man shrieked as blue flames engulfed his tactical vest. The distraction was all Salvatore needed. He vaulted over the counter, putting a bullet in the burning man and turning his aim on the final intruder. The last man was huge, a brute of a mercenary. He tackled Salvatore before he could line up the shot. The gun skittered across the floor. They crashed into the glass coffee table, shattering it. Shards of glass sliced into Salvatore's back, but the adrenaline masked the pain. The mercenary had hands like anvils, wrapping around Salvatore's throat, squeezing the life out of him. Salvatore struggled, his vision darkening. He kneed the man in the ribs, but the armor absorbed the blow. He reached blindly for a weapon, his hand closing around a jagged shard of heavy glass. With a guttural roar, Salvatore jammed the glass into the gap between the man's helmet and his shoulder armor. The mercenary gargled, his grip loosening just enough. Salvatore twisted his hips, throwing the man off, and scrambled for his gun. He fired once. The mercenary went still. Salvatore lay on the floor for a moment, chest heaving, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. The penthouse was a ruin. The smell of smoke, cordite, and blood was thick in the air. But it wasn't over. "Salvatore!" The scream came from the guest room. "Isabel!" Salvatore scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agony in his ribs. He sprinted back down the hall. The door to the guest suite was splintered open. Inside, Enzo was on the floor, unconscious, blood pooling from a blow to the head. The balcony doors were open, the curtains whipping in the wind, and standing near the edge of the balcony, struggling against a man in a grey suit, was Isabel. The man was Rocco. Rocco had the barrel of a pistol pressed against Isabel's temple. He was smiling, his teeth white in the gloom. The wind howled, threatening to pull them both over the railing and down 40 stories to the street below. "Don't take another step, boss," Rocco shouted over the storm, "or the maid learns to fly." Salvatore froze, his gun raised. "Let her go, Rocco. It's me you want." "Oh, I'll get you," Rocco sneered. "But first, I want to see you break. You always acted like you were untouchable, like you were better than us. But look at you now, bleeding for a piece of street trash." Isabel was crying, her hands clutching her stomach protectively. Her eyes met Salvatore's. There was terror there, yes, but also a plea. Not for her life, but for the baby's. "Put the gun down, Salvatore," Rocco commanded. "Kick it over to me, or I paint the balcony with her brains." Salvatore hesitated. If he dropped the gun, they were both dead. If he shot, he might hit Isabel. The distance was 20 feet. In the dark. In the rain. "Do it!" Rocco screamed, jamming the gun harder into Isabel's head. She whimpered. Salvatore slowly lowered his weapon. He bent his knees, placing the Sig Sauer on the carpet. "Good," Rocco laughed. "Now say goodbye." Rocco shifted his weight, preparing to pull the trigger. In that split second, Isabel did the unthinkable. She didn't cower. She didn't scream. She stomped her heel down with all her remaining strength onto Rocco's instep. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was unexpected. Rocco flinched, his aim wavering for a fraction of a second. That was all Salvatore needed. He didn't dive for his gun. He threw the knife he had pulled from his boot holster while bending down. The blade spun through the air, a silver blur in the lightning. It buried itself deep in Rocco's shoulder, the gun arm. Rocco screamed, dropping his weapon. Isabel threw herself to the ground, rolling away. Salvatore was on him in a heartbeat. He tackled Rocco onto the wet balcony. They grappled near the edge, the rain slicking the marble. Rocco was strong, desperate, and fueled by rage. He punched Salvatore in the wound on his head, sending a shock wave of pain through him. "You're finished, Moretti," Rocco spat, blood bubbling from his lips. "The commission approved this. You're a dead man walking." "Then I'll walk through hell," Salvatore snarled. He grabbed Rocco by the lapels of his expensive suit and slammed him against the railing. The metal groaned. Rocco looked back at the drop, his eyes widening in sudden realization. "Wait, Salvatore, wait. We can make a deal. I have the roots. I have the contacts." Salvatore looked at him, his eyes devoid of mercy. "You touched what was mine." With a shove, Salvatore tipped him over. Rocco's scream was swallowed by the wind as he fell into the abyss of the Chicago night. Salvatore didn't watch him fall. He turned immediately to Isabel. She was curled against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. He fell to his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms. She was freezing, soaked from the rain blowing in. "Isabel," he breathed, checking her for wounds. "Did he hurt you? The baby?" I think I'm okay," she sobbed, burying her face in his ruined shirt. "He hit Enzo. He came in from the balcony. I know. I've got you." Salvatore held her tight, his heart hammering against his ribs. For the first time in 10 years, he felt true fear. Not for himself, but for how close he had come to failing her. He looked back at the room. Enzo was groaning, starting to stir. The penthouse was destroyed. The police would be here in minutes. The cartel would be sending a second wave. They couldn't stay here. "Can you walk?" Salvatore asked, pulling back to look at her face. She nodded, wiping the rain from her eyes. She looked fragile, but there was a steeliness in her gaze he hadn't seen before. She had fought back. "Good," Salvatore said, helping her stand, "because we have to run, and we aren't stopping until we leave the city." The escape had been a blur of side streets, switched vehicles, and nerve-wracking close calls. Salvatore had an emergency protocol for situations like this, a burn bag with cash, passports, and keys to vehicles not registered to the family name. They had abandoned the Bentley 3 blocks away and taken a nondescript grey sedan, driving south until the city lights were just aglow in the rear-view mirror. Now, 3 hours later, the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, aching exhaustion. The safe house was an old hunting cabin in the dense woodlands near the Indiana border. It belonged to Salvatore's grandfather, a place that didn't exist on any digital deed or tax record. It was cold, smelling of pine needles and dust, but it was solid. Salvatore barred the heavy wooden door and turned to face the room. A single kerosene lamp cast a flickering orange glow. Isabel sat on the dusty sofa, wrapped in a wool blanket he had found in the trunk. She was staring at the fire he had just started in the stone hearth, her eyes vacant. Salvatore hissed in pain as he peeled off his shirt. The glass cuts on his back had stopped bleeding, but the bruising from the mercenary's grip on his throat was darkening to an ugly purple. He walked to the kitchen sink, pumping the hand lever until cold well water sputtered out. He wet a rag and began to clean the blood from his arms. "You're hurt," Isabel said softly. He turned. She had come out of her trance. She was watching him, her gaze lingering on the tapestry of scars and fresh wounds on his torso. "I've had worse," Salvatore said dismissively. "How is the stomach? Any pain? Cramping?" Isabel placed a hand on her belly. "No, just heavy. I think he's sleeping." "He?" Salvatore raised an eyebrow, walking over to the fire to warm his hands. "I have a feeling," she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips, a mother's intuition. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the wood. It was an intimate silence, born of shared trauma, but there were questions hanging in the air, sharp and dangerous. Salvatore sat in the armchair opposite her. The distance between them was small, but the secrets were vast. "Rocco said the commission approved the hit," Salvatore said quietly. "That means this wasn't just a coup. It was an execution order. The other families have turned on me." He looked at her intensely. "And it's because of what's in that folder, isn't it? What exactly did you see, Isabel?" Isabel pulled the blanket tighter. "I told you, I saw him meeting with the Scorpions." "That's not enough to get the commission to kill a capo," Salvatore countered. "Rocco dealing with the Scorpions is treason, yes. But for the other families to sanction my death, they must believe I was the one making the deal. Rocco framed me." Isabel's eyes widened. He had a recording. He played it for the men at the docks. It sounded like your voice, giving orders to let the drug shipment through. Salvatore cursed under his breath. AI voice modulation, or a spliced tape. Rocco had been planning this for months. He had built a perfect frame job. "Why didn't you come to me the moment you found the photos?" Salvatore asked, his voice hardening slightly. "Why sleep on a bench? Why risk your life and your child's life?" Isabel looked down at her hands. "Because I didn't think you would believe a maid over your underboss. And because of who the father is." Salvatore went still. "What does the father have to do with this?" Isabel bit her lip, tears welling up again. Rocco knew. That's why he hated me. That's why he tortured me instead of just killing me quickly. He wanted to know if the father knew. "Who is he?" Salvatore asked. The question came out darker than he intended. A strange, possessive jealousy flared in his chest, irrational and hot. He needed to know who had touched her, who had left her pregnant and alone to scrub floors. "He's a dangerous man," Isabel whispered, "a man who doesn't know I exist anymore." "Is he one of my men?" Salvatore demanded. "No." "Is he a rival?" "Please, Salvatore," she begged, using his first name for the second time. "Don't ask me. If I tell you, it makes it real. It puts a target on his back and on mine." Salvatore stood up, pacing the small room. The shadows danced across his face. "Isabel, everyone has a target on their back right now. If this man has power, he could be an ally. If he's an enemy, I need to know." She shook her head vigorously. "He can't help. He doesn't remember." Salvatore stopped. "He doesn't remember?" Isabel looked up, her green eyes piercing through the gloom. It was one night, a gala, 6 months ago, the masquerade ball at the Venetian Hotel. Salvatore felt a chill run down his spine. He had been at that gala. It was the night the alliance with the Irish mob was signed. It was a night of heavy drinking, celebration, and fog. He remembered waking up the next morning with a splitting headache and a vague memory of a woman in a gold mask, a woman who smelled of vanilla. He looked at Isabel, really looked at her. The auburn hair, the eyes, the scent he had recognized in the car. Vanilla and old paper. The room seemed to spin. "You were there?" Salvatore asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I was a server," Isabel confessed, her voice trembling. "I wasn't supposed to be in the VIP suite. You were alone. You looked so sad. You asked me to stay. You didn't treat me like a server. You treated me like I was a queen. Punhan." Salvatore's heart hammered against his ribs. The memory was fragmented, but the feeling was there. The softness of skin, the way the woman had laughed. He had searched for the woman in the gold mask for weeks, but she had vanished. "I didn't know who you were," Isabel cried softly. "Not until I got the job at the estate. When I realized the man I had slept with was the Mafia Boss. I was terrified. I thought if you knew I was pregnant, you'd think I was trying to trap you, or you'd take the baby away." Salvatore fell back into the chair, stunned. The air left his lungs. The baby, the child she had shielded with her body while Rocco kicked her, the child she had slept in the rain to protect. It was his son, or his daughter. "Isabel," he said, his voice cracking. She flinched, expecting anger. "I'm sorry. I was going to leave. I promise. I never wanted anything from you." Salvatore reached out, taking her cold hands in his. His large, scarred hands engulfed hers. He didn't pull away. He held on as if she were the only anchor in a storm. "You think I'm angry?" he asked, searching her face. "Aren't you?" "I have spent my life building an empire of dust," Salvatore said, his voice thick with emotion. "Money, power, fear. It all means nothing. Tonight, watching Rocco hold a gun to you. That was the only time I realized I had something to lose." He moved his hand from hers to her stomach. He rested it there gently, feeling the warmth through the wool blanket. "My air," he whispered, a sense of wonder replacing the rage. "You are carrying my blood." Isabel let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his hand on her belly. "I was so scared, Salvatore." "You don't have to be scared anymore," he vowed, his eyes hardening into diamonds. Rocco made a mistake. He thought he was killing a witness, but he just declared war on the mother of my child. He stood up, the exhaustion gone, replaced by a terrifying purpose. "Sleep, Isabel. Tomorrow we don't run." "What do we do?" she asked. Salvatore looked at the fire, his profile sharp and predatory. "Tomorrow we take back what is ours. I'm going to call the only people left in this city I can trust, and then I'm going to burn the commission to the ground." As Isabel laid her head down on the makeshift pillow,